Good afternoon. Hello, how is everyone? Good. Is everyone okay with English? Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Do you want to come forward, because it could be more intimate if you wanted to come forward. You're too shy. Oh, okay. Well, no. We want you to be happy. But yeah, it is nicer, I think, for you and definitely for us. How has your time in Ostrava, Colours of Ostrava, been? It's an incredible festival. We don't have anything this brilliant in in the UK. So I'm Helen Bagnall, and I run an organisation called Salon London and also the Also Festival. And both of these organisations are all about really working with experts, brilliant people, fantastic minds, and getting their ideas out at festivals and other places where people are engaging with ideas. And this has grown phenomenally over the last 10 years. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Bryan McCormack. I think some of the people in the audience know Bryan, right?
Yeah, there's 7 people in the audience. Half of the audience know me.
Well, that's great. It's going to make it much more intimate.
Yesterday.
For the half of the audience that doesn't know Bryan, Bryan's a Paris-based artist, and he has been phenomenally successful with his art that's really reacted to societal issues, all kinds of societal issues, from mental health to, I've got a list actually, class divide, mental illness, loneliness, solitude, urban terrorism. He's exhibited in the Pompidou in Paris, in fact, and he has an installation in the Parc Saint-Cloud.
Yep, a big sculpture.
That's incredible. So he knows what he's doing. But he's here to talk to us today about his project that he did for the Biennale last year, 2017, the last Biennale, which was called Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. Is everyone familiar with the concept of the Biennale? The Venice Biennale. It's every 2 years, and it's a phenomenal, it's like a festival for art. Do you want to explain the Biennale?
No, it's like every 2 years, it's like the biggest art festival in the world. It's existed for over 100 years or something like that, and it's all the major artists in the world expose their stuff.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
And do you want to introduce the project that you did for the Biennale, Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow? So
basically, all my work involves social impact. I believe that an artist today, or at least certain artists today, should create work that has an impact on the society in which we live. So when I got invited to do the Biennale in Venice, I decided to work on the refugee crisis, which is a complicated subject in many countries, including here. So I started to visit refugee camps, and very quickly I realized that if I was going to do work with the refugees, I had to do something that had an impact on their lives. There are 65 million refugees on the planet today. In the next 25 years, there'll be between 150 to 300 million refugees, which means that part of humanity will constantly be displaced. It's just a reality. Whether we consider these refugees economic or war, whatever, or climate, whatever. The fact is that part of humanity is going to live outside of society. If we take 63.5 million refugees or 150 million refugees, we're talking about hundreds of languages. We're talking about hundreds of languages, and we're talking about almost 50% of all refugees on the planet are what we call displaced children. Displaced children means that in most cases, their parents and everybody around them are dead. And these are these children who are roaming around the planet, very often with no education and very often who cannot read nor write. If you cannot communicate with the society in which you live, you cannot integrate into the society in which you live. So my idea came about working with thousands of refugees. I've been in over 30 camps around the world, and I created a visual language with them. So I go to each camp. I make a conscientious decision to go to 50% official camps and 50% squats and camps where nobody goes. So I decided to make a visual language by inviting every refugee. I've worked with thousands from 3 years old to 80 years old, more than 40 different nationalities, and I invite them to do 3 drawings. One of a drawing of their past, the past tense, one drawing of their current situation, the present tense, and one drawing of how they imagine their life in the future tense. So now we have 3 tenses, and I work with a number of different universities around the world, specifically at the moment Sheffield Hallam University in the north of England and Roma Tre University in Italy. And we're trying to create a visual language that will have an impact on these people. So we're creating educational tools and psychosocial tools. The educational tool is basically through the drawings, and I'm going to explain this drawing behind me, which is for me the most horrific drawing of all the thousands of drawings. And through these drawings, to the voice of the refugee themselves, we can create an educational tool that will be placed in every single primary and high school around Europe and in the next 3 to 5 years in the world. This started as a conceptual art project. It has now formed into an NGO. I have 30 volunteers, and we spend literally our lives going to refugee camps across the planet. It's a very simple process. Once a refugee, whatever their age, whatever their nationality, once they arrive in a camp, at 90% of the cases, they're confronted by volunteers. Volunteers are generally coming from privileged backgrounds, generally quite young, very often female, and they're confronted by absolute horror. And they're confronted by this horror, and they do not know how to relate to the person in front of them. At the same time, the person in front of them, the refugee, has just lived through this horror. So by creating an educational visual tool, the volunteer in the camp can understand some basic knowledge about the person in front of them, and therefore aid and help the integration of the person into the camp, and from the camp into the local community, and from the local community into society. So that's basically that.
That is basically that, and beautifully explained. Thank you. I want to unpack it a bit. I want to unpack it a bit and go through it in a bit of detail, because it's a fascinating project, and you know, I think there's a lot in there. The numbers are incredible. The numbers are ridiculous. I don't know if these numbers of migration are familiar to the audience, but they are ridiculously high. How do you know that they're true?
Every single organization, from the United Nations to the IMO, International Organization for Migration, have come up with these figures. It's just a reality. I mean, literally, if we're always speaking about Europe, we're speaking about North Africa, the Middle East. But I mean, if you take the Rohingya refugees who are arriving into Bangladesh, there's over 1 million. If you take what's happening even in Peru there are over 10,000 refugees arriving every day. In Brazil, in Colombia, in Australia, in Asia. So, I mean, through climate change, through economic problems, and through war, the reality is the 63.5 or 65 million is even not probably a fair figure, because we don't have any fair figures. I mean, one little example is in 2017, over 10,000 children who arrived in Europe have disappeared. But we have no figures about this. These children haven't disappeared. They've been sold into slavery, normally sex. But it's just a reality. There are no figures, because the people are arriving. The things you see in the television are just a little part of what is actually happening, because the boats are arriving and you don't see them. They're arriving from, nobody even knows in the Ukraine there are over 1 million displaced refugees, you know.
Yeah, no, I know. And, you know, it has been fairly easy to not really accept the scale of it. It's been quite easy to live without really seeing the extent of it. But you know, what's interesting in your saying with these numbers is the climate refugees that you mentioned. You know, this is going to be on a scale that is going to affect everyone on the planet.
Yeah, but you know, it's part. I mean, and most of the politicians around the world, specifically in Europe, are using this without having any idea or any real figures as a political tool in which to create nationalism, in which to create isolation. So I mean, the refugee crisis is humanity is facing 2 main crises for the existence of humanity. It's climate change and refugees. Climate change is very sexy, it's very cool. Nobody wants to know about refugees. Nobody wants to know.
So why did you choose it if nobody wants to know?
No fucking idea. I just wanted to work with refugees. I mean, I live in Paris. France has a certain number, not as many as you would think, and where I live in Paris, there are. I mean, specifically in 2016 to 2017, with Calais, the jungle, and in Paris, I mean, when you walked on the street, you were confronted by these people. So I suppose that's maybe where it all started. But the fact is that, you know, we all come from a privileged background because we live in freedom. We live in security. And I think when we're privileged, we have responsibilities for the rest of humanity. It's that simple.
And that's certainly been something that we've heard throughout this festival. You know, I've heard it in 4 or 5 sessions that I've been in and been involved in. This idea that we have such privilege, but we're just about getting our heads around the fact that we do have this and that there is a responsibility that comes with it. And, you know, and in every session I've been in, there's been this kind of like need to understand how we actually harness it and how to do the best we can with it. You know, artists are normally at the vanguard of what we can do. You know, and you've definitely been at that, you know, the pointy edge of the arrow in terms of what's coming and how to deal with it. But, you know, do you think you could have done this project without everything that had gone before? You know, I know you don't want to talk about your work that's done before, but if you hadn't had social issues at the heart of all your art that you had done before, could you have been prepared to do this piece of work?
It's a question of age, too. You know,
Say again.
It's a question of age. I mean, I arrived, like, I'm not young anymore, so...
You are.
No, I'm not that young. So when, you know, you arrive at a certain maturity, you have children, you see what's going on in society, and so you build certain mechanisms in which you can deal with certain things, and you try to understand what's really happening behind the curtain, which most people don't want to know about.
Yeah, but again, it's a privilege thing, isn't it? You kind of cut your teeth, you do your conceptual art, you react to situations, and then you're able to really do, you know, your big passion piece, which we've heard, you know, mentioned again and again. Find what you're really good at, find what you can offer the world and do it excellently. And that seems to be what you've done here with this piece.
It's about responsibility, it's about having impact. I don't bring it any further. I mean, for me, it's very simple. It's about standing up and doing something, whatever that may be, but doing something that has real impact, and not impact on me. Me, I'm nothing. I'm absolutely a piece of dust. But have an impact on these people and these people's lives, because it's a question of life and death. It really is.
Yeah, but you're not a piece of dust. You know, you're an artist with decades of experience. It's then using that skill to make that impact. And that's what I've heard time and time again in this festival. It's like, how can I use my skills and my knowledge and experience to make a difference? So it is interesting, you know, to really to hear this from an artist's point of view, because that hasn't been here in this festival yet. So, you know, it's something we need to hear. But if you are working, well, actually what I want to do is talk about the visual language, so the actual idea within the art. So we're talking about yesterday, today, tomorrow. And you know, really to kind of get it into the mind of the audience, I wonder if we could just kind of do it.
In what sense?
In the sense of, you know, we're here as an audience. If we were to imagine, the idea of the art is the refugees that are coming in, you ask them to imagine or to get them to draw a picture of their life yesterday, their life today, and their life tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, drawing is the basis of all communication. You know, we all started by drawing on walls, you know, a long time ago. So, I mean, it's a very simple form of communication that everybody can understand. When I'm dealing with, which mostly is the case with refugees who cannot read nor write, it's very difficult to communicate, but everybody can put a piece of paper on the table and draw something. After, it's trying to get them to draw how they vision their life. When you're dealing with people who've gone through so much horror, it's actually quite easy, because it's like they use this as a process to vomit everything out. Everybody needs to be heard. Everybody needs a voice. Everybody needs somebody to listen to them. So it's very easy, in fact, to go to somebody who's lived through pure horror and ask them to put that down on paper. It's a very simple exercise of vomiting out the pain.
Whereas if we were to do the same exercise...
It won't be the same at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I work with a lot of schools around the world, and I ask the kids to do their drawings of yesterday, and it's like eating a McDo or drinking Coke and watching MTV, which is fine, but it's not the same process. this visual language is based on people who've gone through so much suffering that it's in fact very easy for them to get it all out, in a sense.
And we've actually got an example behind us. Do you want to explain what this is, Bryan?
Yeah, this is, I mean, I've worked with, like I said, I've worked in so many camps and so many different people, and you can see on social media, because I try to put them on social media quite regularly, they're pretty horrific, the drawings that these people produce. This is a specifically horrific one for me. It's the worst one I've ever seen. It's from a girl who's 9 years old, Iraqi girl from Mosul. That's her. And she drew her yesterday. This is her drawing of yesterday. And so she's a Catholic Iraqi girl from Mosul. And as you can see, she arrived back from the church, and she took her way back to her house through the back garden. And when she arrived in the back garden, there was a tree in her back garden, and her mother, her father, and her young brother were beheaded and hanging from a tree. And so she lay down next to them, packed her bag, and waited to die. She waited a day and a night, and she was just there for a day and a night, and she decided, let me see, she was 7 years old, huh? And so she decided to walk. And she walked out of the house, and she started to walk. And from Mosul in Iraq, she finished in an absolute hellhole in Serbia. It's a I call it a closed prison, alone, in a refugee camp. It took her, I think, 12 months or something to arrive there. As you can imagine, I'm not going to go into details, but you can imagine how much violence this girl lived through. And for me, this just absolutely symbolizes the horror that these people live through, but through their voice. It's very important that I say this, and that's why I say I'm nothing. It's their voice that I have to bring out to the world, not my voice. I'm really not important here. So this girl, in one drawing, has explained the absolute horror of our life.
And you know, and how many camps have you been to, and how long
over
have you been
30.
You've been
I
over
think
30.
like 34 or something like that.
34, and how long have you been going to the camps?
Over 2 years, basically once a week, almost. I mean, I have 30 volunteers now, so if it's not me, it's one of the volunteers, but we've basically been in a camp every 10 days, something like that, for the last 2 years.
And it's not just camps, is it? There's divisions in camps. You explained them yesterday. It's like there's good camps, there's bad camps, there's illegal camps. There's a whole
a lot of the places are squats, which is the worst because there's no control. So you go to a squat in like Athens in Greece. I'm just thinking of one, which is an old hotel, and there's like 1,500 refugees there. There are 800 unaccompanied minors living alone, with no control, living with adults in total chaos, total anarchy.
And how were you able to get access? How were you able to get to...
I work with a lot of, I've formed a non-profit now, but I work with a lot of associations and local NGOs, and I have a big network of people who help me get into these places that nobody wants to go to. And what's horrific and what nobody really realizes is this is Europe. And there are places in Europe where people are just literally dying, and nobody seems to know or want to know.
But you said no one wants to know. You've done the work, and people don't want to know. But was your response to that to try and use social media as a tool? I mean, obviously that's something that's available to you now that wouldn't have been available 10 years ago. Was social media a part of the project from the beginning, or did it?
No, in fact, it was because every single camp I've been to in the world, the refugees have smartphones. You can buy a smartphone in a camp for a couple of euro. And then when they find free Wi-Fi spots, they connect. They use this as a way to connect to their home. When they've lost everybody and everything, it's a way through social media. I'm not a big fan of social media, but it's a way through social media to know what's happened in their town, in their village, in their community when everything's disappeared. So the reason of doing this was I would post the drawings, and then I contact the person, and so they can see that their drawing is there, and so they can see that it may seem extremely superficial to have like 30 clicks on a drawing, but they can see that 30 people care about them, that 30 people want to hear their voice. And even if it's only one person, even if it's only one person that that girl sees, has clicked on a drawing, she knows at least there's one person who cares about what she has to say. So that was the reason behind it.
No, absolutely. And you know, again, it's something that we hear again and again. We work with Professor Dr. Cilla Elworthy, who is nominated for the Peace Prize, and she works with local peacemakers and funds them to really have peace, to resolve conflicts peacefully in the way they want to, rather than the way that they're told to. And we have done work with her, and she said, like, just take, you know, just she's seeing a picture of an audience that's interested in her story. It's something that's just beyond her thinking in terms of, you know, that it's so difficult to people to realise that we do care. There is a side of Europe that does care and is just pretty ineffectual about what to do with it. You know, when I spoke to you yesterday, I said, you know, okay, well, what do you do as a first step? And you said, well, like this Twitter feed. So we can do that. We can do that right now. You know, you could, you know, go on your Twitter feed right now. It's yesterday, today, tomorrow, right? While we're sitting there on your phone, and it's something that you've done straight away. And what's really interesting about those images, yeah, go on, Juliet. Yeah, anyone else got their phone? Just do it now. I don't mind if you look at your phone while you're doing it. It's then done. You know, what's great about those images is that they are so childlike.
Yeah, but that's also because, I mean, in many cases, not many cases, but in like 25% of the time, especially with the children, they've actually never held a pen in their hand. So the drawings they make are extremely childlike. And not only, I mean, a lot of the adult drawings, you can see that the Afghans, for example, they may not have held a pen for 20 years. So they forget what it is to draw. So it's always extremely childlike, yeah.
But it's so affecting. You know, that difference jolts you into the realization of you're not actually looking at a house on a hill with a cat. You know, someone's reality is so completely different to yours, and this is, you know, this is such an interesting part of your work. You know, this visual language that you've developed that I think we all now understand, and you know, if we all think about what our yesterdays were like and what our todays are like and what our tomorrows are going to be, very different from the ones you're describing. But you know, that's not the end of the project, is it? You've created the visual language, you've got this data, but this has led on to a new way of engaging.
Yeah, we've created this big digital database that I work with a team of psychologists and educators in the universities. And the goal is that we're developing in the next 3 to 5 years is, like I said at the beginning, this educational app that through the voice of the refugee, directly, through drawings like this, we can educate the future generation of what it is to be excluded from society, because facts and figures we don't care about anymore. We've seen all the pictures and it has no effect on us anymore. We've seen all the boats falling into the water, we've seen all the dead bodies, and it means nothing to nobody anymore. We zap it after 5 minutes to watch MTV or whatever. But when you go to the schools, like I do, and you show these drawings, not maybe this drawing, but you show drawings of children, and you show the same age group of the students, and instantly they understand. Instantly they get it all. They don't care about facts and figures, but they understand, because it's a language that is brute. It comes from the heart, and it speaks directly to you. It's not conceptual or intellectual, it's emotional. This is my life. This is what the fuck I've lived through. It's that simple. And children who don't have as much priorities as adults get it immediately. And it changes their outlook of what a refugee is today. And that's my goal. My goal is not my generation. My generation is already fucked. My goal is the future generation. My goal is the next 25 years. So when these 150 million people have to live excluded from society, maybe, perhaps naively, but maybe the future generation will understand better who these people are, and therefore will have a better understanding of how these people can integrate into their society.
There's 2 ways I want to go with that. Hopefully we can get to both of them. But there is that sense of... Yeah, let's talk about how it actually works. No, let's go the other way. Go the other way. So, you know, you're saying facts and figures don't convince everyone. That's absolutely true. You know, that we zap as we see stuff and we go past it. But, you know, that's 'cause our generation is so bombarded with information and we can't process it, so we're turning away from it. You know, and social media allows that to be very, very easy to do. But do you think that kind of ability to discount traditional media has created a new role for artists? You know, are you stepping in where we can't really engage in the same way as the nuances of stories as we did in our generation?
You know, a couple of years ago, you probably all remember a couple of years ago, there was this photo of this young boy who was dead and washed up on the beach. And in the 24 hours that photo was published around the world, there was an increase in donations of something like 150% around the world of people giving money to help organizations. That instantly dropped 2 weeks after, and since then it's just been reduced and reduced and reduced. Too much info kills the info. It's just we've seen too much. It's literally that simple. I mean, CNN, not one of my favorite news channels in the world, but CNN brought out a documentary about 6 months ago about the slave trade in Libya, where all the refugees, or a large part of the refugees coming from north of Africa through Libya, were bought and sold. And you saw the CNN documentary where they were buying a guy for like the equivalent of $150.
Now.
That was shown for 200 million people saw that. And then what happened? Europe are trying to make a deal with Libya now to build platforms in Libya to keep the refugees in Libya. So, you know, that's what information does.
It's true, but the name of this session is Can Art Change the World, you know? And I think what I want to ask is, but we now know that data doesn't change the world. We know that one killer, you know, one image that captures the media's attention and everyone's attention doesn't change the world. You know, what I'm asking is, are you hopeful with, you know, with this project that art can change the world?
Art through education can change the world. It's only through education we can change the world. I believe, at least, like I said, my revolution is an educated and educational one. I believe that the only way to change people is to educate them. Most of the time people are so afraid because they don't know. They don't know and they don't want to know, or they won't make the effort to know. But once people are educated, we're all the same. Once people are educated, they'll understand. And once there's understanding, there is communication and integration.
But was this a revelation from you, going from an artist to suddenly setting up an NGO? You know, was this a surprise, kind of like turn events in this project for you?
Yeah, it was like I went to the point where I thought either I stop now and it's like this nice vanity thing of an artist, or I decide to make real impact. And by real impact means I have to bring it further, I have to bring it through education, I have to form an NGO, and I have to bring on volunteers, and I have to continue and to push it as far as I can.
Well, that's really different for an artist that is doing work about societal issues.
Yeah, it's really complicated.
It's really complicated.
It's a fucking mess.
How did you have the skills? How did you do it? I mean, how did you just feel your way through it? I mean, at what point did you realize, shit, I'm going to have to set up an NGO?
Yeah, I don't know, just the blind leading the blind. I'm just walking around kind of half knowing what I'm doing. Now it's a bit clearer because, you know, it's formed and we have volunteers and the whole thing is becoming much more professional. But it was really, really complicated for me, yeah, really.
Yeah, and that's right. But it does sort of like, it is a good example that anyone can do anything. Sorry, Bryan, to use you that way.
No. Anybody can do anything. It's a question of will.
It's a question of will. Way. Let's do your tomorrow. Can we just go into a bit of how this education works? What do you mean? What are you doing with this? How are you educating the next generation is my question.
So, like I said, so we're developing a tool in which we will give free to every single high school and primary school. Most democratic countries in the world have educational science in their schools, which means that the children are obliged to learn about what's happening in contemporary society. But there are absolutely no tools out there to explain what's happening vis-à-vis the refugee crisis. People just don't know how to teach it. So we're creating a tool using these voices in which every single school will have the opportunity to download free and to teach one lesson once a year to their children from like 6 years old to 22 years old, what it is to be a refugee using the language.
And how does it work? What do you actually
I'm
do?
not there yet. No.
This is what you're working on.
This is what we're developing. We've started it over a year ago. We'll need another 2-3 years before it's developed totally.
All right, but you've done some work at Sheffield, I think.
Yeah, I've taught this in like about 20 high schools around Europe. It just basically means going in, showing the drawings, asking the kids to do their drawings. You know, last week I was in Berlin and there was a performance. We did a performance of this. And what we did was we asked the people in the audience to draw their yesterday. So generally they drew the sunshine and eating in a restaurant and whatever. And then I showed them this. There's no other explanation needed. Looking at their drawing, looking at this drawing, they realized the difference, the absolute difference between their life and the life of this person. So basically it's about using the voice of the refugee to explain in a non-verbal way, very clearly, what it is to be a refugee today. It's that simple.
And what has the response been? I mean, you had this exhibition in Venice in the San Maggiore. Is that right? Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. And you know, the Biennale is phenomenally prestigious. You know, the whole art world is there. The whole press is there. What was the response like to your?
You know, but I mean, the art world is basically made up of middle class, liberal intellectuals who generally have a leaning towards the refugee crisis. And the response is obviously, oh, the horror, the horror, the horror, which obviously it is. But the goal is, what's more important is the educational part and the kids, for example. So the kids realize very quickly, without any other information, what it is to be excluded from society. It's the new form of racism. We've integrated color, we've integrated religion, but we cannot integrate the refugee. So the art is the visual language. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But one thing that really blows me away every time I do it is I generally, when I can, I ask for 3 drawings. It depends on the place I'm in and the horror and the situation, because very often I'm in squats that will exist for 48 hours and they have to move because they're arrested or they're deported, etc. And I would say 1 in every 6 or 7 people I've asked to do a drawing of their tomorrow, they hand me back a blank piece of paper because they cannot imagine what their tomorrow is. And when you have a child who draws that for their yesterday, when you have a child who hands you back a blank piece of paper for tomorrow because they are totally incapable of imagining a life after today, that for me is probably the worst horror I've seen.
It's interesting you say the worst horror you've seen, because you know the nature of this project means that you have seen more than enough horror for one person. How do you guard against that kind of disappointment that people are not more engaged with this issue? How do you guard against what you've seen? Me personally, it's alcohol, but no, it's
not
really, right?
No, it's, you know, life is complicated for everybody. Life is complicated. We all have to fight to survive, to get forward, to make money, to keep our husband and our wife and our kids happy, and just to evolve as normal human beings. So I perfectly understand that most people don't neither have the time nor the occasion to think other than their own little world. It's totally normal. But at some stage, we have to just kind of stand up and realize that, no, it's not just about us and our own little world. We have to take it further. We have to do something. Okay, and before I go to questions, just wanted to ask, you know, another big question that's come through in a lot of the sessions we've been in at Strava is what can one person do? What have you learnt? What is possible? What is good for an individual to do to engage with this situation? Number 1 is just to understand, to try and understand. Yeah, number 1 is comprehension. It's understanding. So that the next time you're confronted by somebody like this, who's in this situation, you'll have more understanding. It can be as simple as just a look, a smile, whatever it can be. I mean, every single person depends on where they are in life and what they're confronted with. But it starts always about understanding. To understand that it's just a person in front of another person. Let's start by that. you know? Yeah, because until now we're not really doing that very well. So let's start by trying to understand that, you know, and not necessarily listening to the media and our local politicians. I'm very often asked, but what's the solution? I don't have a solution. Your politicians are for that. That's what they're paid for. Oh, but why don't these people stay in their country and it's the problem of the country? No, it's not the problem of the country. It's not that simple. Nothing's black and white. It's never that simple. It's a question of realizing that part of humanity is just completely excluded. It's that's important. And once you start by that, little by little, that's all it takes. Step by step, baby steps.
And has this project changed your perspective on the question of can art change the world? Are you in a different place from where you started?
Yeah, because I believe this can. I don't believe in general art can, because it remains an elitist activity that doesn't necessarily in all cases have a real impact. When you're dealing with the refugee crisis, you're dealing with the lives and the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. So therefore you have to, you're obliged to do something that has more than just your own vanity or showing photos or whatever it is you do. It has to be something that has direct impact on these people's lives. Through that I believe art can change the world, yeah.
You created art that can change the world.
They created art that can change the world. I just put it all together.
A conduit,
yeah.
Incredible conduit. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Bryan and his work? Yeah.
Nobody ever asks me questions.
Yes, they do.
Hello, hi.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. I'm sorry, not more people are here.
I'm surprised. I was expecting like 3.
More people should hear this,
honest,
especially in this country, I think.
Those 2 and then somebody else. Yeah.
The interesting bit is, I was passing by, I think it was yesterday, by a session which was called Threat of Terrorism in Europe, and that was packed. So that's interesting.
Yeah, but that's normal, you know. Yeah.
So I have 2 questions, if I may. One is, how are you guys funded, and whether there's been kind of interest from, I don't know, like ministries of education or the European Union? So that's question number 1. And question number 2, you mentioned that you did like a session in Berlin, and that you traveled to some high schools, and I'm just wondering whether you've also done the sessions in the part of the world that at least you guys refer to as Eastern Europe. We like to think of ourselves as Central Europe, but kind of, especially the countries, which in European Union, kind of the Visegrad 4, are very much against refugees, and there's quite a bit of prejudice.
Yeah, funding is always a problem because I have to be very careful. I'm not going to be funded by Coca-Cola or Total, So, at the moment I'm funded by the French gas, which is quite clean and everything is really cool. It's called NG. Again, European funding, I've had the propositions from French governments and European funding, but I'm very wary of it because, as in my opinion, at least in Europe, the politicians have absolutely no idea of what's happening or what to do. They just literally don't know. So from time to time, they might jump on the occasion of taking this and using it somehow. So it's always a complicated issue. As it develops, I choose and I see. Doing this in Czech Republic is, well, look, I don't know. We'll see. The idea is, it's complicated. I mean. Serbia I cannot get into anymore. I have a list of countries where I'm not really welcome. Yeah, I won't go into that list now, but there are quite a few. The goal is to be able to go to the countries where it's particularly blocked and to be able to explain through the drawings what's happening. It's a question of desire and opportunity, really. Maybe Czech, maybe actually in Ostrava, we'll see. I'm speaking with some people. But it is complicated, but not just in Central or Eastern Europe. It's also complicated in Germany now, in France. I mean, in Italy, it's just a fucking nightmare with that idiot of a minister. It's complicated. I mean, let's not even get into Trump in America and the Mexican refugees. Just so,
What about
you know.
What about the UK?
No, you've gone. Brexit, you've gone away. You've just sailed
Can
away.
I just apologise for Brexit?
I mean, and the whole Brexit thing was around the whole refugee crisis. It's just absolutely
it pivoted.
ridiculous.
It did pivot on the refugee crisis. Yes, there was, even though we were totally not totally unaffected, but it was a crazy issue.
It's complicated. It depends. It basically depends on which school or university. It's starting like that. It really is a step-by-step process. You know.
But you have worked with Sheffield University in the UK.
Yeah. I mean, there are. I mean, not everybody in
There's
England
pockets
is
of it.
against the refugee crisis, but it is complicated because when you're dealing with local government is okay, depending on the government.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing at national level, it's really, really complicated.
Of course it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, here it's complicated in Czech. I know that. I think you've taken like 12 refugees in the last 3 years or something like that. It's just like.
So
yeah, I know, it's crazy.
This lady was just saying that Czech Republic has the lowest acceptance of asylum seekers, is that right? In the EU.
Especially with an unemployment of 3%, I mean, really.
Who of us can throw the first stone, though?
No,
really?
but it's the same, I mean, France are always announcing, Macron is always announcing that France is so good, but they've only taken in a couple of thousand. I mean, they really have, and they've closed the borders now, basically. I can understand Greece and Italy because, I mean, Athens is basically just sinking.
Yeah.
It's really, really bad.
We didn't talk about this though. Did you see any instances of camps where there was an element of hope in the tomorrows? You know, you did read about the camps in Turkey where there was a huge amount of money going into them because there's the idea of young voters were coming through. I mean, were there moments when you just thought, I can see that integration, there is hope for integration in the way this camp is being?
It depends. It really is. It literally depends on the people. I mean, if you take two different camps, one in Samos and one in Lesbos, they're both Greek islands. In Samos, it's just pure horror. Pure horror, and the local people, I don't think there's anyone from Samos here, but the local people absolutely do not want refugees there. Absolutely don't, and they are super aggressive. And you take the other island, Lesbos, which is just totally a nightmare, but the local people are totally welcoming. So it really depends. It really does. Turkey's another thing. Turkey is just, I'm really against it because, you know, there are 3 million people in refugee camps in Turkey. They made a deal with Europe, and basically it's just closed down, and I can't get in anymore, and nobody can get in, and these camps are just prisons. They are prisons. Where people are dying every day. I know I'm really depressing when I'm saying this all the time, but I have to look at the drawing. It's not bullshit. This is a 7-year-old girl who's explaining to you exactly what it's like. And it literally is life and death.
And you've created a piece of art that means we can engage with it too.
Yeah, but that's the goal, that at least it's communicated, you know? It's communicated, and traceability is credibility. This girl exists because of this drawing.
Traceability is credibility, is your expression, description of it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when somebody loses everything, and all their culture, and all their inherited culture, and they have no voice, they don't exist. Yeah. It's that simple. So if you do not exist, you will never exist. So if you give somebody a voice, at least they have the opportunity to express themselves. And if you can express themselves, you can communicate, and then you exist, and maybe, just maybe, step by step, we can arrive at something.
And this is the least that someone can do, can express themselves. You know, you've made it as easy as possible in the visual language to be so inclusive.
Definitely.
Do we have another question for Bryan?
No way.
I bet Juliet does. Yeah, there we go.
Give me money.
Yeah, it's always money.
No, 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 absolutely no way. No, 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 no. No, no, no. Follow on social media. Start by that. I mean, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, yesterday, today, tomorrow, it's easy to find. Follow, click, at least do that. It's one little tiny action, but it means so much, you know?
And I do think, has everyone in the room who's on Twitter followed this project? You can, oh, you can. look at the obstacles. Do we have any other? Yeah, great. Oh, that's a great question.
Doctor.
Sorry.
She drew herself as a doctor. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 She drew herself as a doctor, but she was pregnant when she was 8, twice, aborted, pregnant again.
She was pregnant when she was 8.
Yeah, I know that seems really fucked up, but it's actually a reality. I've got her out. She's in Bremen in Germany now, so she's
What do you mean you've got
surviving.
her out? Sorry, what do
Sometimes I try to help through my network certain people to get out of certain camps. I can't really go into detail because it's called smuggling. So. No, but if I can try to help people in certain camps to make certain connections with certain organizations. This girl is very specific and she needed a lot of help and she's doing better.
I don't think any of us really care how you go about helping a child that's been pregnant twice at the age of 8. It's just the relief that someone is doing something. And I think I've got to echo Juliet's question there. Is there nothing else that we can do to help? You're out there on your own, Bryan. It's never an easy, or it's never a place really to be encouraged. Or is there nothing more we can do in terms of being a community to support it?
Write to your local governments, protest, argue, speak with your local politicians, tell them they're wrong, tell them they don't understand, be informed, be educated, know what's happening, know really who these people are. These people are not coming to steal your jobs. They're not coming to steal your wife or your husband. It's very simple. Every single person on this planet has the right to live a normal life. It's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Every single country in the world, democratic in the world, has signed up for this. It's that simple. Everybody has the right to live in peace. That's what you have to do. Educate yourself. Be aware. Act like you can in your local community. Give me money.
do you know, sometimes that's one way that we can use our privilege. You know,
Educate your children, educate your family, educate your friends. Be aware, know what's happening in the world.
But to do what? To do what to help?
Like I said at the beginning, if I had the answer, I'd be a politician. You know, well, no, not really, because, but I don't know. There is no answer. 150 million people, there is no answer. It's just a reality that all politicians will not say. I can't speak about Czech Republic. I can only speak about France. For example, when President Macron comes and says, we're going to decide this many people. But it's a total lie. Because they're not deciding. Nobody can control this. When you think of the numbers, 150 million, so there is no control. It's just a question that our children and our children's children and our children's children will live with part of humanity excluded from society. It's that simple. So be aware, educate. That's how we do it. Vote or don't vote, but vote correctly. Not like Brexit. Not like, look what's happening. Well, I won't go into detail about politics.
Yeah, no. Do you have any more questions before I bring this to a close? No. Bryan, thank you so much. I think, you put it's been fascinating to hear how your journey has taken you from a position where art really you've developed your art to something that can change the world. It's an unusual story. It's a fascinating story. And I think we're all convinced it's much needed. So thank you so much, and thank you for talking to us.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank
Bryan
you.
McCormack.
Good.